Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to head over to Canada once again for the first time in what feels like a very long time. So the beer that we're going to have a look at today comes from a brewery that I've never tried anything from before. They seem to be a relatively new addition to the Canadian craft beer scene, and this beer comes from a province that I haven't tried very much from actually, so that's another point of interest for me. But they seem to have built a very good reputation for themselves so far. They do a lot of different things, and it's always nice to introduce new Canadian breweries to you here on the channel as well. And I was quite surprised actually about how easy it is to get Canadian beer over here in Japan. So yeah, we'll need to keep an eye on that going forward. But the one that we're going to have a look at today is supposed to be a very nice beer. It's a style as well that this brewery is supposed to be very good at, so we'll just need to see how we get on. Hopefully it's another good beer, hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head to Vancouver in British Columbia in the western part of Canada, and we're going to have a look at my first beer from Strathcona Beer Company. And of course these guys are just to the east of the central part of Vancouver. Strathcona is one of the districts, I guess we could say, of Vancouver City. But this particular beer is called Big Sexy Funk. It comes in at 5.5% ABV. They're saying on the front that it's an IPA, but as far as I can gather, this one is a hazy New England, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I bought this beer at the craft beer base Mother Tree in Umeda in Osaka in Japan, and it just kind of caught my eye. Like I say, there was a number of Canadian beers there, and this was a brewery that I didn't recognise, so I thought, you know, bugger it, why not, let's see what they have. So yeah, let's crack on then and see what this beer has in store for us. So as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting though, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done, or I will do, I should say, from Strathcona Beer Company. This is the very first time I'm trying one of their beers, as I mentioned before, but there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support you give is massively appreciated. Remember, you can go into the channel homepage and search for beer using the geography tagging system. Go into the homepage, use the search bar, put in your hometown, state, county, prefecture, whatever. If I've reviewed beers from your local area, they should pop up. Otherwise, you can check out the playlist of beers from different countries, and you'll find this one in the Canadian playlist along with other things, and hopefully we can add to that in the future going forward. There's a lot of good Canadian beers out there that I do need to check out. But yeah, let's crack on and have a little look at my brewery notes then. But remember, if you want to learn more about Canadian craft beer, there are many nice Canadian beer tubers out there. Lee Russell is one of the guys who's been around since the start of BeerTube, and there are other newer guys like, you know, like Redbeard and things like that that you can check out too, so give them your support. Big love to them from me, of course. But let's go on to my brewery notes then and talk about Strathcona Beer Company. So Strathcona Beer Company, as I've mentioned to you already, are based in Strathcona in Vancouver in British Columbia in the western part of Canada, and they opened back in July of 2016. So the brewery was founded by Tim Knight and Adrian McInnes. Tim has a background in construction and is also a director and senior project manager at Heather Bray Builders, who one of British Columbia's largest contractors apparently. But Adrian is a graphic designer and artist by trade. He also owned like a kind of print shop type thing as well, and his company is called Proper Design. But both of these guys are Strathcona natives, and they essentially wanted to open up a neighbourhood brewery. But in the early days they recruited Michael Nazarek, also known as Fez, as their brewmaster, and Andrew Proctor came in as well as their sales director. But Fez had been a home brewer for over 3 decades, and he'd been in charge of brewing clubs in Calgary and Toronto, and also worked at CBC television for about 25 years, and he was also the face of Beer the Show, which is a Vancouver based YouTube channel dedicated to craft beer. Andrew came into the company with a wealth of experience from the craft beer scene, having previously worked at Granville Brewing and for Big Rock Brewery, and they say that he's been instrumental in helping the company grow over the years. But when they started up, they found a location in an old 1950s warehouse, about 12,000 square feet apparently. I'm not sure what that is in meters. Remember, as I always say, the metric system is the right way to do things, not, you know, feet and inches and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, they found a location in an old 1950s warehouse. They spent a lot of time converting it and getting their branding and things right. And the brewery itself can be found on East Hastings Street, and they've got an on-site tap room there that sells food. Apparently, they're very, very well known for their pizza. But in the early days, they brewed a number of different traditional beers, such as lagers and English ales, and this actually won them a number of awards. But then they started to diversify and start brewing the more American-style beers with kind of bolder flavours and things, and this is when they really started to make their name further afield. But over the past years, they've continued to expand their brewing operations, and they've also added to the brewery infrastructure. Today they've got fodders as well as a barrel program, so they're doing quite a few different things from what I understand. As of December 2022, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced 200 different kinds of beer according to Untappd, and like I said to you, you can get lots of different things from Strathcona Beer Company. New England IPAs, different kinds of old school sort of Belgian style sours, the more modern sours as well, different kinds of IPAs, and there are of course a number of kind of big, darker and stronger beers as well. But yeah, that is all I can really tell you about Strathcona Beer Company for the moment. If you do have more information though, do send it to me on Instagram or put it in the comment section below. I'm always keen to learn more about the breweries that I'm reviewing for you here on the channel. But yeah, I think that's a nice introduction to Strathcona Beer Company. But if you want to learn more about these guys, of course, check out the brewery website, follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can, of course, check out the Untappd page to learn more about all the different beers that they've released. So yeah, let's get on and have a little look at this beer itself. So like I said to you, this one is called the Big Sexy Funk. It comes in at 5.5% ABV, and this one is being described as an Indian Pale Ale. So yeah, it says on the back here, a dry hazy IPA with citrus accents and fresh tropical fruit aroma and taste, brewed with Pilsner malt and flaked oats, featuring Azacca, Citra and Simcoe hops. So we know all of these hops quite well. All three of them are American, all three about 14% alpha acid. You know, Azacca is going to give you a good bit of a kind of tangerine orange and some kind of pineapple character. Citra is one of the classic American hops, good little bit of mango, quite often a pungent passion fruit and some lemon limey notes. And Simcoe is going to give you that soft, in a New England IPA at least, it's going to give you that kind of softer, juicier passion fruit. But at 5.5% ABV, this is definitely one of the lower ABV IPAs that we've come across in recent times. But you know, some of the lower ABV ones can be really nice if they're a little bit more kind of wheat forward and things. It does say this one has Pilsner malt in it, so it makes me think this beer is more intended as a kind of session IPA. But remember, the whole idea with the IPA and the difference between the Pale Ale, the Session IPA, and the regular IPA, is to do with the kind of hop to malt ratio. So the Pale Ale, the IPA, the double IPA and the barley wine, these styles are all related to each other via the malt to hop ratio. Essentially what a session IPA is when they basically put less malt into the beer, and thus you've got lower alcohol, but they maintain the hop to malt ratio. So you've essentially got a lower ABV IPA in that case, rather than changing the malt to hop ratio and making something lower ABV, which would be a Pale Ale. I hope that kind of makes sense. But yeah, as I say, one of the lower ABV IPAs that we've had in recent times. This can incidentally is 473 millilitres, which is 1 American pint. I'm not sure if they use the Imperial pint in Canada or if they use the American one, but I'm guessing since it's 473, then probably they're more likely to use the American pint in a way. But yeah, interesting, this one. Very nice artwork, as we say. I do like the sort of kaleidoscopy type effect that we have here. But yeah, let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting then. My first beer from BC in quite a long time. We really haven't reviewed all that much from the British Columbian province. So we'll need to see about fixing that in the future somehow. I do need to get back out to Canada and have a wee visit there, because I think I was only there once when I was about 4, and that's about 25 years ago, which is kind of crazy to think about. I'm getting old, of course. But yeah, let's have a wee look at this then. So as you can see, the beer is poured with 1.5 fingers of a frothy, I would say kind of cream coloured head. I wouldn't describe that as a perfect white head. There's some really nice small kind of foamy bubbles toward the bottom of the head there. You can just have a little look at that. But as you go further up, of course, it does get a little bit, you know, you do get a few more kind of bigger and more bubbly bubbles, if that makes sense too. But in terms of the appearance of this beer, I would say the colour is a lovely kind of bright and rich yellow. Remember, the colour of these beers depends on the type of malt that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. 2, the length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugar is caramelised, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. Any barrel aging that you do or any adjuncts that you put in will affect the colour of the beer as well. But when it comes to IPAs, you don't really have to care about that. Adjuncts and barrel aging are going to have more of an effect when it comes to sour beers. But yeah, as I say, more like a kind of mango juice colour, this one. I always like comparing hazy IPAs to different fruit juices, because that's just what the appearance reminds me of, to be honest. Not much in the way of visible carbonation in this one. 1 or 2 little bubbles toward the bottom of the glass there. But as you move further up, it does give you a little bit, you do see 1 or 2 little things going up there, but you can see the head is just fading away a little bit, but it is maintaining fairly well. Good level of haze to this one for a 5.5%er, of course, not the soupiest and gloopiest of New England IPAs that you're going to come across, but at 5.5%, you wouldn't expect that too much. But yeah, definitely an appropriate level. So remember, the level of haze in these beers depends on the oak content, wheat content, and to a degree the yeast. But I think it does look pretty nice, this one. I do think everything goes together pretty well in this beer. Nothing surprising about the appearance. So I think we can take a wee look at the aroma and just see what we have with this one then. So let's do that. Oh yeah. So aroma-wise, this is quite nice actually. It smells, you've got a mix of things going on with this one. So you've got a lovely sort of smooth, malt base to this one. You get a nice little bit of that fresh white bready bread crust in there, absolutely. But you've also got a nice little green component to it, quite a bright green component as well, which makes me think the beer leans more toward dry hopping. And you've also got a kind of juicy, fruity character to it as well, which is also very nice. So everything you would expect of a New England hazy IPA. It doesn't give so much of an impression of being a session IPA, to be honest with you, but I think it, I do think it goes together pretty nicely actually. Yeah, aroma-wise, I have to say it is pretty nice. So let's break this down and describe it a wee bit more in depth for you. So the backbone of this beer, absolutely, you get a little bit of that kind of fresh white bready bread crust coming out of this thing. So fresh white bready bread crust. It has that little bit of greeniness in the back of the nose for sure. But on top of that, you can smell a little bit of a more kind of fluffy, fresh white bready character coming out of the beer. And then you have some wheaty notes. I do actually get a good little bit of wheaty bitiness out of this beer, which is quite interesting. And that's one of the things I've often found with the more session IPAs, is they tend to put a little bit of wheat in them just to, just to give you that wee bit more zip and kind of sessionability. And I'm getting a bit of that vibe in this beer for sure. So yeah, aroma-wise, I think this goes together quite nicely from that perspective. But I'm also getting a good little bit of smooth, oaty character coming out of this one as well. So you can smell that smooth, creamy oaty note in there. You've also got a little bit of that kind of dry, oaty note in there too. As I've always said, oats are a good indicator of how fresh your New England IPA is. The more creamy it smells, the fresher the New England IPA is going to be. The more dry they smell, the older it's going to be. This one has a little bit of both actually, and it kind of makes sense when it's an import beer. But I've actually found that when it comes to the lower ABV sessionable ones like this, they actually hold up a little bit better than some of the higher alcohol ones. The dryness in the oats doesn't come out that much, but quite often, as I say, more session strength IPAs like this tend to use a bit more wheat. But I am also noticing, it did say that they use a little bit of Pilsner malt in this one, and you can smell that little bit of Pilsner malt crispness to the beer, and it's also got a wee bit of a kind of McVitie's digestive biscuit type sweetness as well. So you can certainly smell that in the middle of the palate with this one, or in the middle of the nose I should say. We've not tasted the beer yet. You can definitely smell a little bit of that in this one, which I have to say I do quite like. So aroma wise, this one on the malty side of things is pretty nice, and it does come across as quite fresh. But the one thing I will say is that when I sugar this beer up, I do get a little bit of a kind of wholemeal brown bready character coming out of it, which is quite interesting. I didn't quite expect that. So, it is nice in that sense too. You've got a little bit of diversity going on with this beer the more that you smell of it. So yeah, bread crust, white bread, a little bit of wheaty character, lovely kind of smooth oats in there, a bit of dryness, bit of creaminess, but I'm also getting a wee bit of that kind of biscuity sweetness and a wee bit of the kind of butterscotchy Werther's Original type thing in there. As I've always said, there are 6 different notes to look out for in a New England IPA. The sort of farmhousey, yeasty character, the rye leaning grainy side of things. Those are more common in American brewed New England IPAs in my experience. I can't say whether that's true for Canada as well, right enough. But yeah, you've also got the wheaty bitey side of things, the oaty creamy side, the barley malt bread, and also the more kind of sweet side of things, which is more common, I think, in the European New England IPAs. But yeah, this one for me is quite straight up and quite straight shooting in that sense. The malty and yeasty side of this beer goes together quite well. You get a little touch of woodiness out of this one, the more that you smell of it too. But yeah, on the hoppy side of things then, the green component for me, as I said, is actually quite bright. There's a little touch of earthiness in this one, but nothing overly much. You've got a lovely bright floral character, some smooth grassiness in there as well, and I think it just goes together. It really does just grow together very nicely actually, but you can tell from how kind of bright the green component in this one is that it relies mainly on late addition and dry hopping. So remember, 3 different kinds of hoppings when it comes to IPAs. Early addition hopping, first hour of your wort boil gives you mainly bitterness. Late addition hopping within the last half hour of your wort boil, that gives you like a little bit of bitterness, but mainly flavour and aroma. And you've also got that the dry hopping as well, which is after the wort boil, and that's all about the flavour and aroma. So you need to bear this in mind. So New England IPAs tend to rely on the latter 2 in my experience, although some of them have a little bit of early addition hopping, but West Coast IPAs use all 3, or at least they did back in the day, and that's what gives you the big dank notes. And when it comes to the green component in these beers, when you've got a very deep green component, that tends to be from early addition hopping, but this one is definitely more bright, which indicates late addition and dry hopping. But on the fruity side of things, this beer is pretty much what you'd expect as well. So you've got lovely kind of soft passion fruit in this one from the Simcoe. The Citra isn't really showing its more pungent side either in this one actually, so I'd say there's a lot of soft passion fruit in there, some juicy mango, but you've got things like apricot and a bit of papaya underneath the softer tropical notes. Also a good little bit of pineapple for me as well. And when you sugar the beer up, you get a little bit more of that kind of sharper orange. It's more like a mandarin than a tangerine, to be honest with you, I think, on the nose. But yeah, there's a little touch of a lemon limey note to this one as well, but this is mainly a kind of softer tropical leaning IPA for sure. I think that's most definitely fair to say when it comes to this one. So yeah, aroma wise, this is pretty nice actually. So I'm curious to see how this beer tastes. So as I always say, take a bit of time to enjoy the aroma before you get stuck in, but I think we'll get the rest of the beer into the glass and see what we've got. That's pretty damn full actually. They really should make these glasses a little bit bigger than the American pint. But yeah, let's have a taste of this beer then. Spilt a wee tiny bit of it there. But yeah, this is the Big Sexy Funk, a 5.5% New England Hazy IPA from Strathcona Beer Company in Vancouver in British Columbia. Slàinte, skål, cheers, kampai, since we're in Japan. Yeah, it wasn't a good idea to fill the beer up right away. We should have taken a sip and then done that, but what can you do? It happens. But yeah, first impression of this beer, you know, it's actually a little bit of a kind of grainy IPA. I'm getting quite a bit of graininess out of this one. You've got the breadiness, which you'd expect. Good little bit of green component to it as well. Then you've got the kind of softer tropical fruits. So yeah, quite interesting, I have to say. It's still in pretty good condition, but like I say, I'm getting a wee bit more graininess out of this one, and you can feel a bit of that kind of Pilsner malt crispness to it as well, and some of the wheatiness. So quite an interesting beer, this one. I do have to say that. Quite different from what we've had from other session IPAs in recent times. So, yeah, this is quite interesting, actually. Just this is a really quite light and quite drinkable beer. For me, I would say this one goes together quite nicely. So, where do we start with this? In terms of the, let's go from the middle third of the palate. So, middle third of the palate, you can feel that bready, that sort of grainy bread crust forming the backbone of the beer, and it does get drier and drier the further into the aftertaste that you go. So, a good little bit of that going on with this one, that kind of drier quality coming out of the beer. So, yeah, dry bread crusty character. On top of that, you start to get a more kind of wholemeal, brown bready layer, and then toward the front of that middle third of your palate, there is a little touch of woodiness comes out the beer as well. I would say too that this beer, it does show you quite a bit of its yeasty side as well, which I find quite interesting. I wasn't quite expecting that from it, but yeah, it does work quite nicely in that sense. So, on top of the kind of brown bready layer in this beer, you can feel the white bread. You do get a kind of slightly more dense white bready layer to it, and then you can feel a little bit of a wheaty note on top of there, just kind of thickening the beer up. I think there is definitely a little bit of wheat in this one because the beer really has a bit of bitiness on the back third of the palate. So like I say, bread crust, wholemeal bread, white bread, those two from the barley malt of course. Then you've got a kind of thicker and slightly bitey wheaty layer. But down the middle line of your tongue, above that layer, you can feel the oats. And the oats for me, there's a little touch of creaminess there, but they are actually starting to get a little bit drier in a sense. And the beer, the further you go into the aftertaste with this one, it really starts to lean toward a more, it really does start to lean toward a more kind of wheaty, bitey side of the spectrum actually. It really becomes a more kind of wheaty leaning New England IPA. So for me that's quite interesting. But yeah, the wheat, as I say, the wheaty bitey layers there. On top of that you've got an oaty layer as well, which is kind of dense and also quite dry. It's got a teeny touch of creaminess down the middle line of your tongue, but yeah, as you move out toward the edges of your palate, it really does give you more and more dryness. Now, in the very dead centre of your palate, there's a little touch of a kind of McVitie's digestive biscuity note. I'm not sure how good a descriptor that is for the Canadians that will be watching this video, but yeah, you do have a little bit of that McVitie's digestive biscuity sort of thing, and that sweetens up as you go further out on the palate. But toward the back of that middle third of your palate, you really start to get a kind of Pilsner malty dryness coming out of this beer, so that's interesting too. Yeah. There's absolutely a little bit of Pilsner malty dryness. There's absolutely a little bit of a kind of Pilsner malty dryness in the back of that middle third of your palate there. And I think, to be honest, that's everything we should say about the middle third of your palate, because the things kind of start to lead on into the back third of the palate there. So the border region between middle third and back third of your palate, you feel a little bit of a kind of bready build up to this one for sure. So you can feel that in there, but the Pilsner malt is kind of throughout that, and you start to get the dryness there. But the back of that middle third of your palate, or the back third of your palate, I should say, brain is not working. So you do feel that there's a more kind of grainy, bread crusty character there, and you can feel that that graininess does build and get drier the further into the aftertaste that you go. Above that, you've got the brown bready layer, the sort of wholemeal brown bready layer, and that is most definitely taller on the back third of your palate, so you can feel that there. Then you've got the white bready layer, which again is taller and feels a little bit more grainy, and then you can feel a mix of sort of Pilsner malt dryness above that, and also what I suspect would be a little bit of a more kind of wheaty bitiness actually. So that is kind of interesting with this one. This is, as I say, definitely more of a kind of wheaty, bitey leaning IPA. And above all that, you start to get some of the more yeasty esters out of it, so you can feel that more airy, yeasty, sort of farmhousey type note. So it's got a little bit of that kind of farmhousey, slightly woody, bready character coming out of it, which I think is really interesting. Yeah. But it's nice, as I say. Definitely on that back third of the palate, you can feel the flavour is taller. And as you come further forward, it just condenses down and squashes together that little bit more. And yeah, this is something that we notice in quite a lot of IPAs. Now, I think we've said everything we need to about the malty side of this beer and the yeasty side of things too. Let's go on to the hoppy side of things. So back corners of the palate, you do get a little bit of earthiness in there, but as you come further forward, you can feel there's a little touch of herbal character, and as you push toward the front corners of the palate, it's definitely more sort of floral and aromatic, and it's quite a bright green component in this one. So like I said earlier, this beer is probably relying more on late addition hopping and dry hopping rather than anything else. Round the front curve of the palate, you've got a little bit of that lighter grassiness sort of going on, which I think is really nice as well. And then you've also got a little bit of that, you definitely also have a wee touch of a kind of zestiness to the grassy note in this beer as well, which I do like. So yeah, I think this beer goes together quite nicely from that perspective as well. Yeah, I think that covers the green component, but this beer does get a little bit more bitter the further into the aftertaste too. So, border region between front third and middle third of your palate, there's a little bit more of a kind of, you do get a little bit of that kind of bready build up in this one too. The base of the front third of your palate has a bit more of a kind of brown bready, bread crusty sort of thing going on. And then above that you get that nice oily bubble where the juicy, fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. So let's look at that. And yeah, the fruity side of things is pretty much what you would expect from these hops, and it is very similar to what we picked up in the aroma. So at the back of that front third of your palate, Citra is actually showing a bit more of its pungent side in the flavour, I would say. So at the back of that front third of your palate, you get a bit of that stronger grapefruity punchiness from the Citra. As you move further forward, it gives you a bit of a more kind of mellow passion fruit, I would say. And then as you come forward, you get a mix of the softer Simcoe, the softer passion fruit from the Simcoe, and the juicier mango. As you reach the middle of that front third of your palate, there's a little bit more kind of papaya and apricot underneath. And then as you move into the front half of the front third of your palate, you get the Azaka, you get that nice sort of juicy pineapple with a wee bit of tangerine, mandarin orange mixed in. So it's really nice and from that perspective as well. Yeah, the way the flavours in this beer go together on the fruity side of things is really nice, and the fact that this beer has a bit more graininess to it and a bit more wheaty bitiness, and also that kind of Pilsner malty crispness, it makes it a very sessionable IPA, which I'm guessing was the intention with this one. So yeah, this is a nice introduction to Strathcona Beer Company, I have to say. I would be very curious to go and actually visit these guys and film an out and about video in their tap room. So we'll see. Canada's been on my list for a wee while. We just need to see what we can make happen over the next year or two and see how that works out. But yeah, lovely kind of New England hazy session IPA, this one I guess we should call it, and a good introduction to the brewery. So I'm happy enough with this beer, I have to say. Let's round off this review then with a wee look at the mouthfeel. So for me, mouthfeel wise, this one, bottom end of mid-bodied, I think. Kind of sits around there for me. Carbonation has a little bit of crispness to it. You kind of want that from a session IPA though, in fairness. You want it to be light and drinkable. But yeah, light and drinkable, kind of crisp IPA in a sense. There's a little bit of dryness and graininess to this beer, as we've mentioned. Yeah, so quite, yeah, mid, I think bottom end of mid-bodied, crisp, light, sessionable. I think that's fair to say. In terms of the IBU count, I think there's about 30-ish IBUs in this one, which is standard for the New England style. Malt base, as we said, leans a bit more toward the grainy side of things, but it has a little bit of Pilsner malt bite and a bit of wheaty bite to it, which is interesting. Little tiny touch of sweetness, but not overly much. Then the fruity side of the beer is kind of soft and tropical leaning, that's for sure. But overall, a very nice session IPA, this one. I would call it that at 5.5%. But yeah, I'm quite impressed with this one, and it does make me very curious to try some of their other things, especially when I've read about some of the different beers that they do. So yeah, definitely cool to review another BC beer for you here on the channel. We don't have enough of these over in Sweden, unfortunately, but hopefully that's something that changes over the next wee while. But yeah, this was the Big Sexy Funk, which is quite suitable for this one in a sense, because, you know, with all the kind of grainy characters you get out of this one, it does give you the sense that some of that might be due to the yeast rather than the actual malt grains that they've used. So yeah, quite a suitable name for this beer as well. But yeah, as I say, Big Sexy Funk, 5.5% ABV, a sort of New England session IPA, this one from Strathcona Beer Company in Strathcona, Vancouver, British Columbia. So once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Strathcona Beer Company as well, and we will no doubt return to these guys at some point in the very near future. But until the next time, Slàinte, Skål, cheers, Kampai, and I'll catch you in the next review. Make sure you check out Strathcona Beer Company, check out my social media, check out theirs, and I'll catch you guys later.